So can I tell you about Confessions? Then can we do the
What certificate is it?
Confessions 15, funnily enough.
Okay, fair enough.
Which is lovely.
Has it got the goat one in?
It's in the Confessions description by the BBFC. It talks about the things that the film includes, and then they actually use the phrase. That said, apart from the gory blood effects, there's very little in terms of injury detail. So Confessions is a Japanese chiller, which people have been comparing with movies like Battle Royale and to some extent Audition, although I think the Audition comparison is completely misguided. The reason they're comparing it with Battle Royale is that it's one of these Japanese horror movies that deals with schoolrooms and school children and the kind of the strange, cold, psychopathic violence of that situation. It's directed by Tetsuya Nakashima, and it's adapted from a novel, which I think you can tell very much that it's adapted from a novel. In fact, partly because it has a very complicated structure in which the narrative unfolds as a series of confessions told from individual characters' points of view. And it begins with a long monologue by a teacher explaining to her class why she is leaving teaching, which could very easily have functioned as a as a voiceover. So the setup is, and it's a very convoluted plot, and that's where the setup is. The teacher at the beginning of the film says, I am not going to teach this class anymore because I don't believe in teaching, and the reason I don't. She then talks about a tragedy that she has lost her daughter, but then what she says is that in fact the reason that she's lost her daughter had been involved in a tragedy for which two of the people in the class were actually responsible. She refers to them at that point as student A and student B, and she says that she is going to wreak a terrible revenge upon them, which in fact she has already begun to wreak. Then what happens is that the two people who are allegedly involved in this thing then experience their own repercussions, and we see everything falling out into backstory of how they got to the point that they did this terrible thing, which one of them was responsible for it, which one of them wasn't. All the class turn in upon each other. There's bullying, there's like extreme emotional violence, there's actual violence, and it's a film in which the classroom becomes this sort of scene of enormous horror. Now, on the one hand, the film, it's very, very stylishly shot, and occasionally the style was almost too much. I was reminded, and not in a good way, of there's a film, a British movie called Cashback, which came out a while ago, which I didn't like at all, and thematically I had many problems with it, but it was very stylish, and in the end, you ended up looking at the surface rather than anything else. In the case of Confessions, it is very alluring to look at. There's an interesting soundtrack. There's some contributions from Radiohead, who I like very much anyway. And the whole film has this kind of crushing sense of awful adolescent ennui. It reminded me to some extent of the tone of Gus Van Sant's Elephant. Do you remember that? Which I thought was, do you ever see Elephant?
I remember you talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting film, and there was a little bit of that, but also there was a satire of Heathers and election, and it's about children being appalling to other children. But the problem with it for me was that much as there is stuff that's being said in here about the horrors of childhood, about the horrors of adolescence, about sort of childish relationships or adolescent relationships, the style is so hermetically sealed, is so almost impenetrable, that what happens is you don't end up being emotionally engaged. You end up watching it as an exercise, an arch exercise, a satirical exercise, an exercise in which everything is to do with authorial detachment. For a start, the plot doesn't make any sense, but that doesn't matter, because in the same way as we were talking before about Argento's movies, on a literally factual narrative level, they don't add up, but they're not meant to. They're meant to have some kind of psychological sense. The way the film plays out, I don't believe for 1 minute in its narrative in a real physical sense, but I think that's okay. It's meant to be sort of poetic and, in inverted commas, metaphysical. The problem is that what I didn't have was the emotional engagement that I needed that would make it a really great movie. And the comparison that I would bring up is there's the original version of Dark Water, which is just a terrific movie about a mother's relationship with her child, and it's one of those things in which it's a ghost story which has at the center of it this real heartbreak, this real sense of loss, this real sense of poignancy of a real character, and experiencing tangible emotions, but experiencing them in a way which is supernaturally inflected but still feels real. In the case of Confessions, there's none of that at all. I mean, it's closer in style to something like the Vengeance trilogy, Sympathy for the Lady Vengeance, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. It's much more, it's arch, it's stylish, it's designed to within an inch of his life, and it's virtually impenetrable on an emotional level, which meant that on the one hand, I kind of like individual things about it, and I like its darkness and its satire and the fact that it's grim and grueling. On the other hand, I'm kind of annoyed by the fact that the stylish sheen of it meant that I never got beyond looking at it as something that It's like, what do you call that? Is it Teflon, Pyrex? You tap it.
Tupperware?
No, not Tupperware.
Sandwiches?
No.
What?
Toughened glass, Pyrex. It's like you bang, you can polish it, and it looks really good. You put it in an oven, and it won't break. But on the other hand, it's sealed. It's a sealed entity that doesn't allow me
take
in.
the lid off.
Yeah, okay, maybe the Pyrex thing wasn't the way to go with that. They never think of similes whilst on your feet. But so in the end, I looked at it, I thought it was stylish and I admired it, but I didn't actually like it very much because I wasn't actually that engaged.